Good morning. Welcome back to The View on Ethiopia on Menelik Television. I am Biniam Katal. Really appreciate you joining us again. Our goal on The View on Ethiopia is to have awareness on important issues about Ethiopia broadcasted to our worldwide audience. Our mission is to bring accurate information on Ethiopian news and Ethiopian current events. We believe it is our Ethiopian responsibility towards a free and safe Ethiopia for the betterment of Africa and the African diaspora to be the owner of our collective African history. Here on The View on Ethiopia, we spell Africa A-F-R-I-K-A, as the K is very important for us as greater Africans to own our own history and tell our own stories, instead of allowing others to dictate to us what our history is, what our identity is, and what our history is supposed to be. So today we'll be discussing the history and the origin of the Kafa peoples. If you don't know much about Ethiopia, which a lot of people don't, Ethiopia has a very, very old, long history. Some say as long as at least 5,000 to 6,000 years. Ethiopia has its place on the world stage and may even be considered the epitome of Black history in totality. Ethiopia is the birthplace of humanity. At its peak, Ethiopia had a large empire covering even good portions of the Arab world up to what was known as the Persian Empire, and included a large chunk of East Africa. Queen of Sheba, the historical and biblical figure Queen of Sheba, she is ours and we are proud of her. We have a history of saving the Islamic faith. We stopped the Arabization of Africa on multiple occasions. We have the oldest Christian written Bible. And we're the oldest nation continuously practicing the three Abrahamic faiths of Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. You could call Ethiopia the true Black empowerment movement, and it is the only nation in African history to never be colonized. It was so important for Ethiopia to be part of the world story that Emperor Haile Selassie even was an establishing member of the United Nations and sent troops to the Korean War. Imagine that. Today, our guest is Ato Adeto Antonios. Ato Adeto, thank you for joining us. How are you doing?
I'm doing very well. Thank you for giving me a platform, and I appreciate this opportunity.
Wonderful, wonderful. Now, in the Amharic language of Ethiopia, Ato means Mr. So you'll hear me say Ato Adeto. His name is Adeto. And that's the way I'll refer to him. So Ato Adeto Antonios is our guest today. He was born and raised in the Kaffa region of Ethiopia. He came to the United States as a university student to receive a Bachelor of Science degree in nursing. And he has his master's degree in gerontology from Hofstra University on Long Island, New York. Ato Adeto is heavily involved in helping the Kaffa peoples back in Ethiopia through community support and even sometimes helping university students. When I asked Ato Adeto first what information he wanted to discuss about, it was a very interesting response, and we'll get to that in a few moments. But for example, right now, the work that Ato Adeto is doing, which is very interesting, is he's writing down stories that he's reporting back to people in the Kaffa region. One, for example, is Dr. Kifle of Jimma University, and a very many amount of Catholic priests. And they take those stories and they provide that to the Kaffa community there, oftentimes reading the stories, whether it's history about the Kaffa people or others, during campfires at night. And I think that's a wonderful thing. So, Ato Adeto, when we originally discussed something, I asked you a question, okay? And the question was, what makes the story of the Kaffa people significant in the greater history of Ethiopia? Why don't you answer that question for our viewers, please?
Absolutely. The Kaffa people are people from all over Ethiopia that settled and decided to get along. People who are Jews together and make a good living there. It's an area where you don't find conflicts and confrontations. People settle their differences in a humane way. And the most peaceful place you could imagine is Kaffa.
Very interesting and very significant for the current times going on in Ethiopia as well, isn't it?
Absolutely.
Okay, so let's start from some of the history, right? So tell us who are the origins of the Kaffa people.
The Kaffa people, the primary settlers were the Omotic people. Later on, northern Ethiopians who lived by Abai River, Nile River, they had situations where they had to move southward. They called them Gonga, the Gonga people. They have come down south and settled in Kaffa area. And that movement did not stop. People from different parts of Ethiopia continued to move to Kaffa. It's a place of retreat, place where people found safe place to raise their children, live their lives. So the Kaffa learned long time ago how important it is to get along and to live together. The Kaffa are the only Ethiopians who leave their last name. The last name would often be that indicates where they came from. The Minjo people are from Minjar, northern Shawa. The Agao people from northern Gojam. The Ader people from east coastal areas. And there are people who also come from Central African regions, from Uganda. And so people have learned to find this place called Kaffa.
Interesting.
It's green all year long, no droughts, water is plenty, it rains often. So that makes it such a unique place. That's what Kaffa is.
Very interesting, very interesting. So you said that the original Kaffa people are Omotic Africans. So explain that a little bit more. Is there a name for the particular ethnic group, the base foundation of who the Kaffa peoples are?
Most probably, from what I have read and learned, the Menja people, which are kind of oppressed because they were kind of pushed as others came from different places, they kind of pushed them and they are living in the periphery of Kaffa, which is unfair, which I don't like personally.
Yeah.
There are other small groups, those people who do leather work and other crafts, they call them Mano. Mano means the leather work, people who do leather work.
Mm.
They don't marry with the Kaffa. The Manjo don't marry the Kaffa. They're not allowed to marry. Most probably what had happened was the newcomers have pushed the old residents, the previous residents, further to the periphery. And as you go further south to the Omo Valley, you will see several multitude of groups, clans that live there. My assumption is these were the people originally who lived in the Kaffa region. They got pushed as northerners begin to push south. And you would see and you would hear also what happens in Uganda. And Ugandans claim that there are a lot of Ethiopians who crossed over to Uganda.
Right.
Yeah. For example, the Karmajo, originally, most probably they are the border boundary people at the boundary of Ethiopia. And eventually, when colonial powers have split up Kenya and Uganda, Uganda was pushed further south, and Kenya crossed over and connected with South Sudan. But from our experience, once upon a time, Uganda was connected to Ethiopia. So you will find people who look like people from Uganda in southern part of Ethiopia and Kaffa.
Interesting, interesting. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to show our viewers where Kaffa is in with respect to the country of Ethiopia. And here, as you see on my screen now, there's a map of what was historically Ethiopia. Now Eritrea is its own country, and obviously Ethiopia is broken into different regions than before. But Kaffa is here in the southwestern corner of Ethiopia, and it's known for being the birthplace of coffee. So before we get into more of the historical conversation, just to give us your thoughts on Kaffa being the originator of coffee.
Yes, coffee is the lifeblood of the Kaffa people. From 6 months on, a baby born, the mother would probably from her mouth, she will put the baby into baby's mouth. So coffee is just part of life. So it's a sacred experience.
Interesting.
So the Kaffa have grown coffee for many, many years, and they own it. That's the origin of Kaffa. Kaffa, the name itself is related to coffee.
Yes, yes.
You would in different countries, that name plays over and over. For example, the Chinese would call it cafe. French would call it cafe. Germans would call it kafi. So it's really a product tells where it came from.
Yeah.
If you tell me Sony television is made in Uganda, people are going to say, no, Sony is made in Japan. So it speaks about Japan. A product speaks about where it came, what its origin is.
Right.
So coffee is the origin of Kaffa.
Yeah. So I ran into, this is very interesting. So I ran into, let's call them certain extremists that were claiming that they were the owners of coffee from other parts of Ethiopia. So would I guess correctly that you would say that Kaffa comes from the Kaffa people's region?
Well, Kaffa is a region.
Yeah.
Kaffa is not people.
Gotcha.
Kaffa is just a region on the eastern flank of Ethiopia. There are several people who came from all over the place and settled in Kaffa. They call themselves Kaficho, means the people who lived in occupy that area. That's basically what it is.
Interesting.
So Kaffa and coffee is about the land and where it's originated.
Very good.
Yeah.
Very good. So a little interesting stories to our viewers. So my father was born and raised in a town called Bonga in the Kaffa region, and was very, very affectionate and very loving towards the community there, and would identify himself much as a person Kaffa, from Kaffa, and people in college would even call him a Kaficho. There goes that Kaficho, they would say.
Yeah.
So this is known, and so people, the Kaficho people will reach out to me through various means, social media and other things. And I was telling them that I was going to do a show with a historian on the Kaffa region and the Kaffa people, and they already knew by name who Ato Adeto was, and that says quite a bit that the Kaffa people identify very clearly who their historian is. So we appreciate you, and I definitely have a very high level of respect for you, Ato Adeto. My pleasure, my pleasure. So let's get into, as they say in American English, the meat and potatoes. Okay, let's get into the substance of our conversation today. So we highlighted kind of the origin. I want you to talk about this migration. So essentially, that's what you meant by that there was migrations from other places in Ethiopia, and you named certain ethnic groups, Agao and some others. So give us kind of a summary about that, and then we'll get into the source of your information.
Yes, Kaffa, as I said a while ago, it's a stable place. Drought rarely occurs in Kaffa.
Okay.
There may be other diseases that are countrywide epidemics or so, which you can't escape if it is the so, but wars rarely occur in Kaffa. It's only somewhere the end of 1800s that there was a confrontation between people, states or regions. Other than that, I personally, growing up until age 18, I never seen people fight. If you believe me, I never seen people fist fight or stick fight or nothing. I was shocked at somewhere I was 19 years old when the Derg, the military government, took over. That's the first time I ever saw such violence and bloodshed. So Kaffa is a very quiet, peaceful people who got along and lived there. So these people who are fleeing wars went to Kaffa because they don't want the war violence out there. People fleeing drought or some kind of disease, rinderpest, for example, like that hurts their cattle, and they lost all their cattle, so they move south and they prefer to go to Kaffa. So this has been the history of Kaffa. People of different backgrounds, they came down and got along and made a life for themselves.
Yeah, so you highlighted three groups. You said Agao, you said some people from the Har region. So I wanted you to just kind of make that very clear, those few groups that you had information on that had made migrations from different parts of historical Ethiopia and resettled in the Kaffa region.
Yes, the Kaffa region, let's get back to really the 1600s.
Okay.
When quite a number of people from eastern coastal parts of Africa fled towards the interior. That's the time people were captured and bound and put in the ship and sold like cattle. So because of that, a lot of people from the coastal region had fled to the interior. And that had contributed to some of the instability to the area. Kaffa was in its past, was a very big territory. Its territory bordered to the Gibe region, all the way to the Gibe region. Because of this instability, somewhere, migration has brought quite a number of people towards the interior. Gotcha. From the eastern coastal regions.
So you're talking about like from what is now present day southern Somalia, maybe northern Kenya. Is that what you're talking about?
Exactly, northern Kenya. And we know that because of the names of the people. They'll tell you, what's your root? They'll tell you, I am like Kamba from the northern parts of Kenya. And they would say, I am, now it's very insulting to say this word, but they would say there is a Kaffa Galla, they call them Kaffa Galla. Currently it's called Oromo. So these are people who have moved from the eastern coastal region into the interior.
Interesting.
Yeah. So the people from the north who have also migrated south towards Kaffa, there are Tigray people among Kaffa, Tigray. There are Minjo people, Minjar, from Minjar. Argoba people, Argepo, we call it Argepo.
Interesting.
So all these people hold on to the name. It's like encrypted into their history. They don't have a written history, but they hold on to these words that identify who they are.
So give us some examples of that. You said Tigray, you said Menjar. Give us some examples of names.
There will be, as I said, the Agao people, the Minjar people, the Adar people from the eastern part of the country.
Right.
And so primarily those unending list of names I could just read up, but
yeah, please, yeah, give us a few examples.
Yeah, they will have names like Gofa, Gofa people. There will be Karo. The Karo people are from the South Omo region, but they are in Kaffa. You'll
Interesting.
find them.
Interesting.
Yeah. They call them Koisho. They are from Konso.
Wow.
You know? So Nao is another oppressed group that is pushed to the borders. They probably was the original, settlers.
Interesting.
And the Busa, they call them the Busasis, who came from the north. They even consider them the probably mulattoes from Portuguese, intermarrying the Portuguese settlers in the 1600s.
Interesting.
So you'll see those people. The Bench people are in the southern part of Kaffa. The Anfilo. So all these groups moved into that region because there is a reason for them to move out there. It's safer. Safer.
As you said, it was a place of refuge, Kaffa.
Absolutely.
Okay. So let's get into this author that you find a lot of information about Kaffa and this monk, Pedro Paez.
Yes.
So tell us a little bit about Pedro Paez and what he wrote on the origins of Kaffa.
Yes, Pedro Paez's book speaks about a monk that was sent with the ambassador of Emperor Susnios of Gojam.
Okay.
He was sent to Kaffa so that the leader of that area, the governor, would show them the passage from Kaffa to northern Kenya, to the port of Malindi.
Interesting. So the monk is Ethiopian. The monk was a member of Atse Susenyos, or Emperor Susenyos' court.
Of course.
Interesting.
He
and
was.
So Pedro Paez is reporting on his relationship with this Ethiopian monk.
Exactly. In Pedro Paez's book, it comes up that this monk who was sent on a mission by Emperor Susenyos and his ambassador, plus I think number of Portuguese soldiers. He sent them to Kaffa so that the Kaffa would lead them to the port of Malindi, northern Kenya.
Interesting.
So that they could board a ship from Malindi to Goa, India. That was a Portuguese colony.
And what year was this, roughly?
I'm sorry?
What year was this, roughly?
It was somewhere in early 1600s.
Interesting.
Yeah, early 1600s. So it has to be somewhere 1612 or so. So the book was written 1622.
Can you show us the book, please?
Sure. Okay.
Wonderful. And it's called The History of Ethiopia by Pedro Paez?
Pedro Paez.
And it says 1622?
1622.
Wonderful. I'm gonna show our viewers how to find Pedro Paez. So it's not hard. And then you should see here now the spelling of his name, Pedro Paez. And here's on Wikipedia, and that's just because it's an easy source. And you can go through here, and it says he was alive from 1564 to 1622, and he was a Spanish Jesuit missionary to Ethiopia. And so Ato Adeto said that this particular written work was his essentially like a daily log. It was his writings where he was keeping track of his visit and missionary work in Ethiopia. And you can find that work online. So that's very interesting. So give us just a little bit of a summary on that mission from Ethiopia to the port that you talked about. Just a quick summary, and then we'll go on to the next author.
Yes, the priest that traveled, his name was Antonio Fernandez.
Okay.
He's the one who, for the first time, a Catholic priest ever reached Kaffa.
Interesting.
Yes. So once he got there, the leader of Kaffa region, they call it Hinaria. Kaffa, that area, that leadership was to be the Hinaria tribe or something to do with the Hinaria royals or so. When he got there, the royals didn't, the leader did not want him to explore the other side of Kaffa. So he said to him, look, you could go eastward. There is another loyal subject to Susnios who would help you guide you to Malindi port. So they were on their way to Malindi and then to ultimately to India so that they could procure some firearms for the emperor, because at the time the Islamic forces were very difficult to manage. The port of Massawa was run over by the Islamic groups that very made it very difficult for Emperor Susnios to do business. So that's why he chose the land route to Kaffa and then to port of Malindi to Indian Ocean. Yes.
Interesting. Very good. So is there anything else more significant that you want to talk about this particular time in history?
The significance is the fact that Ethiopians, they were not divided. They respected the leaders, the kings. They did business. There was no friction, confrontation, tribalism, or so. They believed in oneness of Ethiopia. Yeah.
Very interesting. Now let's talk about this other author that you gave me some information on, this Alexander
Bulatovich was a soldier.
Okay.
He worked for Emperor Menelik. The time when this happened is to be understood in its right context.
Okay.
Menelik was caught in between, where European powers were sectioning up African nations, and he wanted to keep his nation. Sometimes it was a need for force. I know there is some grievances. As far as I'm concerned, Menelik's move was strategic, and he had to make that move because the Suez Canal was opened at the time, and Europeans were excited about East Africa. Somalia was divided into Italian Somaliland, British Somaliland, French Somaliland. In the north, the British have Egypt, and they had Sudan. In the south, they had Kenya and Uganda. Ethiopia had to save itself. Menelik had to make a move. So that's how Bulatovich was involved. Bulatovich was in there. He was a geographer, and he is also a man who guided the army so that they get to know the position where they are. There's no GPS at the time. So he was the man who was guiding them, because if you get lost in that part of the country, you can't find your way back. That's a very, very difficult area. It's adjacent to, Uganda, South Sudan, even, the guy who's called the Lord's Army, what's his name? I forgot his name, I'm sorry. They still couldn't catch him. He's hanging out in that area. So everybody who wants to hide, they go there. So it's a very difficult terrain and it's a very difficult area. So that Alexander Bulatovich was a geographer. He was able to direct Menelik's army, and he went there. And he's the one who wrote, this was written in 1897.
Okay.
He says, when Alexander Vladovich reached Kaffa, he says, sad stories, because there was a lot of conflict at the time. He says, signs of death and destruction amid the green grass, the white human bones shown here and there, he says. There was a lot of violence at that time. It's because of, I think, religious conflicts.
Interesting. So Alexander Bladovich was you said he was a Russian mercenary originally,
Yes,
but he was also a geographer, and so he assisted Emperor Menelik in navigating the Kaffa region. Is that what you're
absolutely.
trying to say? Okay. And so that's his significance in the Ethiopian story. And so he wrote about the Kaffa region, correct?
Yes, yes. He wrote about the Kaffa people. He is impressed about how beautiful the country was.
Okay.
He says the valley of Gojeb River, surrounded by mountains, he says. And he says it abounds in wild goats and antelopes, leopards and lions, and encountered here, he says, large animals such as elephants and rhinoceros stay lower on the river's course. So it was such a place where humans and animals and plants got along and lived quietly, comfortably.
I got you.
Yes.
So for our viewers, I want them to be able to see who this man is. So if you do a Google search on Alexander Bladovich, you see him there. That's on Wikipedia. You see the spelling of his name, and you go through, and of course it's Wikipedia, but it does give you some information to allow you to find some works. So the book that Ato Adeto is talking about or referring to is called From Entoto to the River Baro, and it's written by Alexander Bladovich. And I did find a PDF, a file of the book that you can find, but if you want to buy the book, you can find it on this Rakuten website. You can also find it on Amazon. It's a bit expensive there, so but that is the cover. From Entoto to the River Baro, report on the journey in the southwestern region of the Ethiopian Empire in 1896 to 1897. So that's exactly the time period that Ato Adeto is referring to when Emperor Menelik was trying to fight back these various European forces. Now, interestingly enough, the Russians had a very good relationship with Ethiopia and were fascinated, not just because of our Orthodox religion, Orthodox Christianity, but they loved a liquor called arake. And so they were fascinated that their vodka was for sake of argument's sake, we'll say equal to our arake. Obviously, we have our own preference, right? But they were very impressed with that. And so there was a multitude of similarities between the Russian culture and the Ethiopian culture, and I think that's how we found a bond, and that bond helped us to repel the European colonial forces. So let's talk a little bit more about this book, Ato Adeto. Give us what you think is the summary and the specific highlights about the Kaffa region and the Kaffa people itself.
The book speaks many things, but
Okay.
for me, that impressed me more is it's his understanding of the region, such a resourceful region, such a green region, with its waterfalls and hot springs and ponds, and just it could be a beautiful place for ecotourism. It could be a good place for a production of food for areas that suffer from drought. It could be a place that could be connected by building good transportation and bringing in better system for agricultural production. So it's a gem that's neglected and not used properly.
And you saw that in his writings, he identified this, that this was important to him.
Absolutely. He
Okay,
says,
give us some examples, please.
yeah, okay, sure, absolutely. Yeah, he talks about abundance of precipitation, never have droughts. He talks about date palms, the forest bounds in flowers which fill the air with fragrance, he says. The sky was cloudless. The sun was almost at its zenith, he says. This is cool breeze, he says. You know, he says, he just it's like a paradise, he says. And he says, it was as if in front of you stood the enchanted forest from Sleeping Beauty. This was written long time ago, and it hasn't changed much. Still there, virgin. So it's a beautiful place.
Very interesting. Very interesting. Those are excellent sources for us to take a look at. Now, now that we've talked about a couple authors that have written about the region and the people, let's give your historical opinion. Let's talk about the history there, the kingdom. You gave me some notes that talked about the head of the Kaffa society with two kings at the same time. So, kind of give us like begin the rundown of the way the Kaffa society was built from the top to the bottom, from the points of view that you feel are significant.
Absolutely. The Kaffa, historically, they govern themselves very well. They have a representative system. They had representatives sent from different regions to work with the dynastic king. In the meantime, there is a spiritual king. They don't create conflict with each other. The spiritual king is also advisor to the dynastic king.
Okay.
So that kind of setup is kind of similar, really, when we look at the Western governments. Maybe about 100 years ago, the Pope, over 200 years ago, the Pope in Rome has to anoint the King of France. If he doesn't, he can't be a king. King of Germany has to be anointed by the Pope. It's kind of similar meaning to it, because in Kaffa, the spiritual king is the stabilizes, and he creates a balance. So because of that, the society has some kind of sense of balance. The dynastic king cannot just decide to do things, and he could be reprimanded by the spiritual king. So that creates a society that is balanced, and it helps them to get along.
So name maybe the two top or three top kings in the kingdom of Kaffa you think are significant, and then if you have information on the spiritual kings that advised them, and give us a little story about them also, please.
Yes, the spiritual king is named. They call him Ekko, Ekko. It's usually it could pass from one to the next, but this is kind of it's a miracle, some kind of revelation. Something happens and somebody rises up and proves himself that he is called by the spiritual divine force, that he should be the spiritual king. But the dynastic king have come from generation after generation. They call them the Minjo. The Minjo was the most recent dynastic line. Minjo, mind you, they most probably are people from Minjar regions of Troa. Yeah, they features, you could see their features. You could see some Europeans have taken pictures and have left some kind of traces for us to find out who do they look like. They look like from certain regions of Ethiopia that settled there, and they're not only the Minjar who've been kings all the time. There were others also who have Bushashi, Mibal, people who were also kings at some point. So because of that, the dynastic king, the spiritual king, the balance creates a society that is be able to solve issues. If the king becomes out of control, the dynastic king goes out of control, the spiritual king brings him back to the center.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So this particular dynasty, you're arguing that it's quite possible that they're originally Shoan and then came to Kaffa at some point and then took over the leadership of the region.
Yes. Yes.
Okay, interesting. So for our Western audience, Showa is what Ethiopians would say is the center of historical Ethiopia. It is where Addis Ababa, the capital city, is. And there's many different disagreements over this particular region in Ethiopia that Ato Adeto is talking about. But it's very interesting that the Kaffa people, a portion of them may originate from central Ethiopia. Very good to know. Can you name, as I said originally, can you name maybe two kings that were significant in the kingdom of Kaffa?
Well, the one I know, I'm not really into dynastic stories because they doesn't speak about the ordinary people's stories. The last one, his name is Gaki Sharecho.
Okay.
Gaki Sharecho.
Okay, so tell us a little bit about him.
Yes, he was, they said he was a fair leader and proud, and he had kept his people safe. He lost his throne at the last battle when Menelik wanted to collect all the remaining territories and put them into one, because Menelik was in a way threatened because countries are being sliced up. As I said, even Uganda used to border us. It doesn't border us any longer. Kenya became just like a knife across, and Uganda was kicked southward. And central Equatoria, South Sudan, was lost and became part of the Sudan and became under the British. So because of that, when Menelik went in, Gaki Sharecho was the last king of Kaffa who had been betrayed. He says he was betrayed. Some of his people said, we can't fight this fight any longer. It's not, it's not going to profit us at the end. It's not going to benefit us. So they said he was taken to Shawa, and he was imprisoned in Ankober. And then eventually, I guess he was buried somewhere in one of the monasteries, I guess. But he was, he had thrown his ring, his golden ring, into Gojev River. That's one of the traditions. He says he threw his ring, royal ring, and then said that was it. That was the last one.
Wow.
Yeah.
Very interesting. Very interesting. Okay, so for our viewers, because it's important to give you sources that you can go and review on this very complicated area of history, you can go online, and just like I did, and I'm using Wikipedia not as like a main source, but it does give you kind of a pointer, a clue of where to find some information and then go and get more information. So right here, which I would say this is pretty accurate, the Kingdom of Kaffa, it says established in around 1390 and ended in that battle or that war that Ato Adeto is talking about between Emperor Menelik of Ethiopia and the king of Kaffa at the time. So if you do a search on Kingdom of Kaffa, you find more information that you can research on the region. All right, so we've gone through a few authors. We've gone through some history of Kaffa up into the last king. Tell us about the common people of Kaffa, and that was very important to you. So you said that there was a few things in the notes you sent me: a council of representatives, a head of soldiery, head of natural resources. Tell us about those particular roles, and then let's get down to the common man.
Yes, the dynastic king was counseled by these representatives that came from various regions. And they were assigned to do governmental work you know, land management and hold courts and so forth. Um, they also made sure that neighboring tribes and, you know, warlords didn't attack the people, didn't come to take away their cattle and their, you know, or even seize them and sell them, because it was a lot of bad things happened to that part of the country, you know, especially in people coming from the eastern coastal region. They have taken away people and sold them and you know, and shipped them out to different continents. So the king of Kaffa had a pretty tough military setup. They had used, you know, incredible methods to deter others from coming into their territories. If they did, they have done all sorts of interesting methods to destroy them, to capture them, so forth. That's what the king did, and also his council, who were in charge with military positions and tax collections and so forth and so forth. So it was pretty sophisticated society for its time, you know, for society that, you know, existed. There is so much that is impressive, because they were spiritual people as well as political people, you know. So that's why the spiritual leader, the king, the spiritual king, made sure that people remained sane. You know, there was no hanging or violence of that any sort. Most of it is through conversations that they settled their problems. That's why I said when I was growing up, I never seen anybody fight and anybody bleed or break bones, never, up until I was like 19, 20 years old. They're very peaceful people. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So you keep bringing this up. So this is very significant. So tell us about the spirituality of the Kaffa people then.
Yes, the spirituality of Kaffa people, it's only later Orthodox Christianity infiltrated and had good footing and good hold of it. But prior to that, they, it's really, it's a spirituality based on, it's not worship of sun or moon or river or so, but they would celebrate some form of gathering. Okay, they will have a slaughtering of an animal, it's a bull, and they will bring the meat, the drinks, and people would come up and pray to the divine. They call it a Yero. Yero is the divine Lord. Yero means it's like a savior. That's what it means. Yero. They pray to Yero. Yero is the divine and the source of life, the source of justice. So they would pray that, you know, the women could deliver healthy children, the land could produce enough to eat, keep the disease away from us, and keep those who would harm us away from our land. And that prayers are said, and this is done every year.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Is there an origin story similar to like Christianity in the Yero faith?
It's similar to some extent, because we are, the Kaffa, obviously we are connected to the northern people,
right?
People of the north. And because in Amharic, Xavier means God, Xavier. But the Kaffa only take the year, the last one. Most probably has something to do with it.
Interesting.
Yes, Christianity has something to do with it.
Interesting.
And on top of that, you know, we're not too far from the Holy Land. Even Egypt is just north of us, and people don't want to think that Jesus was in Africa. He was in Egypt. Egypt is part of Africa. So, that Christian religion is not too far for any part of Ethiopia. Yeah.
Very good.
Yeah.
So the God's name in the Cathedral faith is, say it again?
Yer.
Yeah.
Xavier Yer. Yeah. They only took the last part of it.
I love it. I absolutely love it.
Yeah.
Anything else that you feel that's significant to kind of touch about the Kafa people or the Kafa history?
Kafa history, as I said, about the spiritual practices, one of them was, suppose a woman delivers a child with disabilities, and the child happens to die or something happens, the women will dress up in certain leaves. They would gather together, maybe 50 of them. They would have these spiritual songs they sing, and they would travel as far as they could to find a big river. Mm-hmm. They cross the river, they throw their dresses there, and they get back home because they're supposed to, send this ill, that away from the land. They do that. They are spiritual in every different ways. The women and the men, as I said to you, the kind of Thanksgiving type of celebration where they would find a place by the mountainside or by a river basin. They will build a temporary shelter where people would come collect there and say all the things that they want to say about, mishaps, and pray over it and share the meal, and they go home. So this is, yeah.
Wow. Very interesting. Okay, so we're getting to the kind of the tail end of our show, and I want to discuss some current events and or important current issues, let's call them. And so you wanted to talk about the how valuable the Kafa land is. So give us your thoughts. Give us your thoughts on the value of the Kafa land itself and what could be done with it.
Yes, the Kafa land is unexplored. We don't even know what is underneath it. Mm. So it's a kind of virgin in a lot of ways. So we hope someday they will find minerals that are of great value. Somebody has to explore it. Number two, Kafa is a very rich in water. At given time, some pond will just pop up. I think it has to do with the Rift Valley, the East African Rift Valley. Okay. We get, so the Rift Valley, maybe that part of it will drift and go into the Indian Ocean, but the Rift Valley comes close to Kafa. So because of that or so, we sometimes periodically water will just erupt from underground.
Wow.
Yeah, underground, and sometimes it damages homes and people's settlements, but water is just like abundant there. So abundance of water means it's really a wealth, because you could use it for farming, you could use it for for just day-to-day use. In Ethiopia, water is very difficult in certain areas.
Right.
So because of that, the country remains lush, green, and in the region stays lush and green, and like timber, the trees that just been there for hundreds of years, they grow and grow and grow. So it could be a good place to grow some trees for use, or the fruit farms are another option, and farming is just a great option because there's no problem with water and grass and so forth for the farmers.
Arable land, yeah, arable land.
Yes.
You wanted to talk a little bit about development. Give us your thoughts on development of the Kaffa region.
It's the saddest part is the transportation, lack of transportation, good transportation. We have highways recently built that, you know, that's okay, but it's not really that would help the area, you know, to reach any kind of success. A train will be a fantastic thing. Even an airport nearby would be helpful. You know, if you grew flowers, and if you wanted to ship flowers abroad, I think you could, you know, use a cargo planes to transport it, because, you know, the lifespan is short with flowers, you know, once they're cut. So airport would be very helpful.
Interesting, interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, you know, and then I realized it dawned on me about halfway through our discussion that we should talk about this. There's a movement in Kaffa right now. It's getting pretty loud. You know, according to the Ethiopian constitution, there's this thing called Article 39 that, you know, I'm not real a big a fan of, but it seems like the Kaffa people are starting to want to declare separate, like, regionhood as probably the best way to, or statehood, and not to separate from Ethiopia, but to be recognized as a particular state. So you can kind of give us your thoughts on it and the reason why behind that that voice is starting to get louder.
Yes, Kaffa used to be one of the 14 provinces that Haile Selassie. Uh, Haile Selassie was a very smart king, and he knew the history of Kaffa too. So he knew this was a very big territory that got incorporated. But now, later years, where the previous government before this one had shifted the regional capital over like 500 miles from Kaffa. So the Kaffa have suffered a lot, because in order to solve their legal issues, they have to go travel 500 miles to go to the capital that they assigned.
Which is the assigned
Awassa. Awassa.
Interesting.
They have to go to Awassa to settle legal issues, to get work, to get permits for their business, to solve their disputes, whichever form. So the Kaffa has been suffering so much. They said Haile Selassie, when he decided to create 14 provinces, there is a good reason why he did. Because to provide services, you could have courts, you could have public schools, public hospitals, security services. He divided the country based on providing services, not ethnic mumbo jumbo that we hear today.
Right.
It's about services, about serving the people. So the Kaffa people have suffered because they became voiceless for the last 27 years or so, because they just had to go along, because the previous government decided that the capital has to move about 500 miles from Bonga.
Interesting. So what, to our Western viewers, what Ato Adeto is referring to, we've talked quite a bit on this show about, is the Mullah Zenawi government that took over in 1991 from the previous government, which was a communist government. And so when the Mullah Zenawi government took over in 1991, 3 years later, in 1994, a constitution was established that was very complicated. It made things very complicated and unnatural, I would say, for the way people viewed themselves, as well as the ability to access services, as Ato Adeto put so plainly. I've never heard that phrase before. Thank you so much, Ato Adeto, because that's very important, right? If you're part of a country, part of a city, part of a state, you need access to services. That's part of what a government is supposed to provide. So before we get into kind of the final end of the show, we go into the solution section. Talk about that a little bit more, about how what used to be called Awassa is now called Hawassa, which is a whole nother story on its own. Tell how that's complicating things. You said it one. You said it's like 500 miles away. Give our viewership a little more details on that, please.
Yes, they have created that Awasa region as
Right.
a capital for the southern people. They just combined, you know, like vegetable soup. They just threw them in there together, and they said, "This is your capital, whether you like it or not." So if you have any issues, you go there and solve it. Court issues, legal issues, you know, permits, you know, and everything else. So the people have no choice. So they had to put up with that for so long. And the Hawassa people now are taken over by Sidama. Hawassa is now the capital of Sidama. It's now ethnic issue. So now the Kafa, as always, they are very accommodating. They said, no, we're not asking to be the Kafa region alone. We have other groups that live around us. We could incorporate and work together and create a region for us so that for everyone, it will be a central place. So we could be courts, security services, hospitals and schools and other services that would be helpful to the community, to their communities. That's where, the contention is. So
what would be the natural capital for the Kaffa region, or what would be for the proposed Kaffa state? What would be the natural capital for that?
It's Bonga. Bonga has been the capital for a long time, for a very long time, and they are not really gonna put up a fight if you tell them you could put the capital maybe 5-10 miles away from Bonga, as long as it's accommodating, as long as it's accommodating everyone and convenient for everyone.
Very interesting. Very interesting. All right, so we're getting to the close of our show. We have 5 to 7 minutes left. Let's talk about solutions, Ato Odeto. So obviously we've covered history, we've covered authors, we've covered a lot of different topics or subtopics within the topic of discussion being Kaffa as a focus. Tell us, what do you think Ethiopia can do to support a stronger Kaffa region?
Ethiopia could support stronger Kaffa people by providing a good leadership, fair and just leadership, and fighting corruption. So that people could be able to use the resources that they have, and also the way the taxation system works. If something is being produced in Kaffa, there should be a certain percentage of that generated should remain in Kaffa, because they have coffee farms that produce plenty of coffee. But when it goes to the central government, that the money has to be distributed back to the local. So why not, if this is being produced in Kaffa, they should give 40%, 30% of it to the region, or the tea is a big thing now. They have tea farms, and taxation is really a big deal. Taxation is a big deal. If you're producing products in certain areas, the area should be somehow to be able to tax it. But it's only central government who has the authority to take all that and decide a budget, how much budget they should get. And most times it's arbitrary.
Arbitrary. So
Yes.
It's kind of undetermined. It changes.
Absolutely.
Interesting. So what do you think the Ethiopian diaspora can do to help support Kaffa?
They could support Kaffa by investing small. It doesn't have to be big. They could help build schools equipped enough to provide useful education. They could support bringing in the technology, products like farm products, where the people could produce more You know, tractors would be very good. You know, even I thought about it for a very long time, but I didn't have the means. I would buy 3 tractors and hire 3 drivers and set up a small mechanic shop to repair them, and ask the farmers to rent these tractors. With they go rent these tractors, they go do the plowing, and when they produce later on down the road, they could pay the fees, not right away when they sell their products.
Interesting.
That way, they instead of using the old primitive method of farming, now they would have this kind of a better technology. And also, of course, finances is an issue. You have to have a set of dollars so that you could buy the tractors and leave some money for maintenance and pay the drivers, and eventually collect from the farmers later on down the road. So those would be a very good idea for traditional farmers out there. And to be able to, it's like even hardware store, open a hardware store. So people could buy, now electricity is coming there, and they have electricity in some towns. So they could use power tools. So they could help them, like provide a healthy, clean water. But there's a water there, but you want to make sure that the water is clean, filtration, piping, sanitary services, so forth and so forth. There's too much to do.
So you said that you're working with a Catholic priest that provides a lot of support to the local Kaffa community. You said his name is Bishop Marcos, is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, so if people wanted to contact Bishop Marcos in the Kaffa region, he's a very important figure. Apparently, he reports directly to the Catholic bishop in Addis, in the capital city of Ethiopia. You can reach him at Marcos, which is M like Matthew, ARKOS, C like Charlie, M like Matthew, J like jump, and B like boy at gmail.com. And then also Atodeto is very much active in obviously the Kaffa people's activities, and you can reach Atodeto at A like Apple, D like David, E like Edward, T like Tom, O at rocketmail.com. We've come to the end of our show, Atodeto, and I really, really appreciate you. Was there any final thoughts that you wanted to share with our viewers?
Honestly, I really thank you for giving me a platform to speak about my birthplace called Kaffa.
Yeah.
By no measure do I consider myself an expert on matters of Kaffa and its people, but I am an enthusiast, and I'm a member of a generation about to retire. I am obliged to tell younger people, younger generation, what I know that was told by previous generation as a passage of tradition. I encourage everyone who grew up in Kaffa to write down what they were told by their elders, because we are the first generation who gotten a formal education and are able to write down. So that's what I urge the younger generation of the Kaffa people and others also to be a little compassionate to Kaffa people. They are landlocked. There's no sea. They are, sometimes surrounded by hostile forces. So they need help. I just want to mention some success stories from Kaffa. Of course, Ato Ketau is our success story because often people talk about him. They call him their success. And also there are people who have reached highest academic achievements. Those Dr. Kivle, the professor at Jimma University, the epidemiologist, and sons and daughters of Kaffa had earned degrees in medicine, engineering, space technologies, military science, and so on. And no one should hold them down from investing their knowledge in their birthplace. So I would encourage them to collect their knowledge and their know-how and look at the place that gave them life. That's all.
Very good. Thank you, Ato Adeto. Sometimes I like to share my final thoughts of the show, and I think I'm going to in this case. My family is always going to be connected to the Kafa region and the Kafa people, and they've been sometimes, to be honest, especially to my father, more loving and more respectful, and we appreciate the Kafa people more than I can communicate. But what's interesting right now is I find some similarities to what's happening to the Kafa people, to what's happening to the larger Ethiopia. People are manipulating history and political history in particular in order to gain in a way that's not beneficial to the Ethiopian people. And I find the history of Kafa people to be more inclusive and more representative of the traditional history of Ethiopia. And I find the togetherness and the inclusiveness that the Kafa people show to just be an amazing example of what Ethiopia once was and what Ethiopia should be again. Ato Adeto, we really appreciate you being on our show. God bless you. I look forward to speaking with you in the future. To the Kaficho people, we love you. Dr. Katawa Jigu definitely loves you, and his firstborn son loves you as well. To Ethiopia, God bless you. Peace in Ethiopia. We wish love in Ethiopia, and looking forward to you joining us again next time. Thank you.
Thank you so much.